You ever just look at the world around you and wonder, is there some grand design behind it all? Well, today we're diving into a text by an author named Feng who argues exactly that the universe isn't just random chaos, but the deliberate work of a supernatural soul. So, let's get into the evidence they lay out. So, the author kicks things off with this really beautiful, poetic invitation to take a broad view. It's basically a call to just step back from our busy, everyday lives for a second and look at the universe with fresh eyes, which, as you'll see, is exactly the mindset we need for the argument that's coming. And this, right here, is the central question of the whole piece. The author suggests that if we can just quiet our minds and really observe, we'll start to feel a kind of prearranged order to things. And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophical question, right? It's the launchpad for a whole series of really specific claims. Okay, so the author's whole case is built on evidence that they pull from our own planet and its little spot in the cosmos. Let's start digging into the first major piece of this cosmic puzzle. First up, the author wants us to think about something we probably take for granted every single day, but something that's absolutely fundamental to our existence, the very specific tilt of our planet. It all comes down to this one, very precise number, 23.5 degrees. The argument here is that this is no cosmic accident. It's more like a finely tuned dial set to the absolute perfect position for life to even have a chance. So, to really drive this home, the author has us play a little what-if game. They argue that if the Earth had zero tilt, the equator would be a furnace, and everywhere else would be a freezer, totally unlivable. And if it were tilted a full 90 degrees, say goodbye to land. The ice caps would melt, and we'd be living on a water world. But get this, the argument for precision gets even crazier. It's not just about avoiding those big extremes of 0 or 90 degrees. The claim is that a tiny shift, just half a degree one way or the other, would be enough to spark a global catastrophe. According to the text, just bumping the tilt up to 24 degrees would put our coastal cities underwater. Knocking it down to 23 degrees would trigger devastating droughts. So the author's conclusion from this is pretty clear. This level of precision couldn't possibly be an accident. It has to be the work of what they call the greatest creator. All right, let's move on to the next piece of evidence in the author's case for a deliberate design. And for this one, all we have to do is look up at the night sky at our moon. So you see these numbers here? The author's point is that none of these are random. The moon's distance, its mass, its orbit, they're all presented as perfectly calibrated variables. And the core claim is that if you tweaked any one of these, even just a little, the result for us back on Earth would be, well, a disaster. And to really hammer this point home, the author throws another huge what if at us. What if we didn't just mess with the moon's orbit a bit? What if it just vanished completely? What would we actually lose? And the answer, according to the text, is everything. The consequences would be absolute. This isn't just about losing a pretty light in the sky for poets to write about. The author claims that without the moon, the fundamental engines of our planet, the tides, the seasons, the weather, they would all just shut down, making life itself impossible. And the author argues the loss would be more than just physical. This classic poem is used to show just how deep that cultural and emotional connection to the moon really is for us. It suggests that its presence was intended to benefit us on every single level. This all leads perfectly into the next point, which doubles down on the moon's importance. It's all about its exact distance from Earth, a distance the author argues is totally non-negotiable for life. It's like a cosmic Goldilocks situation. The author says the moon is in the perfect spot. Any closer, and we'd be constantly battered by furious storms. Any farther away, and the weather systems that carry water around the globe would just fail, turning the planet into a desert. Okay, to really make us feel the power we're talking about here, the author gives us this wild analogy. They want you to picture a gigantic jet plane, like the size of 3 football fields, just skimming the surface of the Earth. I mean, just picture the chaos. The author paints this picture of total destruction. Just the air being pushed aside by this thing would be enough to rip roofs off of houses, create a tsunami, and send everything and everyone flying. And here it is. Here's the big payoff for that analogy. The author then asks us to imagine that that plane was the moon. The argument is that if the moon were just a little bit closer, its gravitational pull would be infinitely more destructive, literally pulling the oceans up onto the continents with every single pass. And this is where it all starts to come together. The author is building to this really striking point that even things we think of as chaotic and destructive, like storms, aren't random at all. In this view, they have a very specific, life-giving purpose in a much grander design. I mean, look at this. The text literally breaks it down for us. It reframes our whole idea of weather. Gales aren't just wind, they're giant air convection systems. Typhoons aren't just storms, they're a water transport service. Even thunder and lightning get a job, replenishing the ozone layer. It's all presented as part of a perfectly choreographed dance.
So after laying out all this evidence, the planet's perfect tilts, the moon's precise orbit, the purposeful weather, the author arrives at one singular overarching conclusion. And it all points to this, what the author calls the greatest creator. The text concludes that these incredibly fine-tuned systems, these impossibly perfect conditions, simply cannot be the result of blind cosmic chance. They're presented as the intentional work of a being with an intelligence and power far beyond our own.
So when you boil it all down, the author's message is this. From the way our planet spins to the moon that circles it, every detail is presented as a kind of unmistakable signature, revealing what the author firmly believes is the hand of a master designer. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? When we go looking for answers to these huge questions about our existence, what kind of evidence do we find convincing? And where do you draw the line between an amazing coincidence and a deliberate design? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining me.